My name is Washington, and at 62 I have learned that life can turn on a dime. For 20 years, my son Daniel refused to speak to me after a bitter divorce tore our family apart. I worked my fingers to the bone providing for him only to become a stranger in his life. Then, through an unexpected twist of fate, I came into significant wealth. Suddenly, after 2 decades of silence, an invitation to Christmas dinner appeared. Just like that. No explanation, no apology. But I am not the same broken man I once was. I had 20 years to plan. Let me know where you are watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button and stick around if you have ever wondered what you would do when someone who abandoned you suddenly wants back in your life when your fortunes change. I grew up in a small town called Millfield in the Midwest, where hard work was not just expected but demanded. My father was a carpenter who taught me everything about building with my hands' skills that would define my future. By the time I was 25, I had saved enough to put a down payment on a modest plot of land where I planned to build my own home someday. That same year, I met Sophia at a friend's barbecue. She was stunning blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and a laugh that made everyone around her smile. I was immediately drawn to her vibrant personality and zest for life. We dated for 11 months before I proposed, and within a year, we were married in a small ceremony in her parents' backyard. We started our life together in a rented duplex, while I continued saving to build our dream home. Sophia worked as a receptionist at a local real estate office, and I had secured a stable job with a construction company. We did not have much, but we had each other and big dreams for our future together. When Sophia told me she was pregnant, I felt a joy I had never experienced before. I worked overtime for months to prepare for our child's arrival. On March 12, 1982, Daniel James Washington came into the world 7 pounds 8 ounces of pure perfection. The first time I held my son in my arms, I made a silent promise that he would never want for anything I could provide. The early years with Daniel were everything I had hoped for as a father. He was a bright, curious child, with his mother's blue eyes and my stubborn determination. I taught him to ride a bike in our driveway, cheered at his Little League games, and took him fishing at Lake Millfield every summer. By the time he was 10, we had established a Saturday morning tradition of working on small projects together. I still remember the pride in his eyes when we completed a birdhouse entirely on his own. During those first years of Daniel's life, I finally broke ground on our family home. I worked my regular job during the day and spent evenings and weekends building our house with my own hands. It took 3 years of sweat and sacrifice, but when we finally moved in, it felt like all the hard work had been worth it. Our home was not fancy, 4 bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms, with a large backyard where Daniel could play, but it was ours. As Daniel entered his teen years, I noticed subtle changes in our family dynamic. Sophia seemed increasingly dissatisfied with our life. The home I had built, which once brought her joy, now drew unfavorable comparisons to her clients' luxury houses. The vacations I saved all year to provide were suddenly too modest compared to her colleagues' exotic trips. I tried to remind her that we were living within our means, building security for Daniel's future, but my words fell on deaf ears. During this time, I met Richard Thompson through a construction project. His development company had hired our firm to build a new office complex, and as the foreman, I interacted with him regularly. Richard was everything. I was not college-educated, suave, and wealthy from family money, rather than physical labor. He drove a Mercedes, wore tailored suits, and exuded the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about money. Richard began attending Daniel's baseball games, offering him expensive gifts that I could not afford, a top-of-the-line glove, private batting lessons with a former minor league player. At 14, Daniel was impressionable, easily dazzled by Richard's lifestyle. I noticed a shift in how my son looked at me, a subtle diminishing of the admiration he once held for my calloused hands and workingman's ethics. One evening I came home early from a job site due to equipment failure. The house was quiet, but Sophia's car was in the driveway. I called out, but received no answer. When I walked into our bedroom, I found evidence of what my heart had suspected for months. Sophia's hastily discarded clothes, 2 wine glasses on the nightstand, and the lingering scent of unfamiliar cologne. A quick search of her purse revealed restaurant receipts for places we had never visited together, and a hotel key card. That night, when Sophia returned home, I confronted her with my discovery. She did not deny the affair with Richard. Instead, she told me she had outgrown our marriage and wanted more than I could provide. Daniel, who was 15 at the time, overheard our argument. The look of confusion and hurt on my son's face as he stood in the doorway still haunts me to this day. "Mom, Dad, what is going on?" he had asked, his voice cracking. I tried to shield him from the ugly truth, but Sophia had no such reservations. "Your father cannot give us the life we deserve, Daniel," she said, her voice cold with finality. "Richard can." That moment marked the beginning of the end of my family, as I knew it. The divorce proceedings were a battlefield where I was outgunned from the start. Richard hired a high-powered attorney for Sophia, while I could barely afford basic legal representation. What should have been a fair division of assets quickly became a systematic stripping of everything I had worked for. During the proceedings, Sophia painted me as an emotionally distant workaholic who prioritized building houses over building relationships with my family. She conveniently forgot all the baseball games I attended, despite exhaustion, the school projects I helped with late into the night, and the family dinners I never missed, no matter how demanding work became. "Your Honor," her attorney argued, "Mrs. Washington has been functioning essentially as a single parent, while Mr. Washington pursued his construction career. The emotional neglect has taken a significant toll on both her and their son." I watched in disbelief as the judge nodded sympathetically. The truth was being twisted beyond recognition, yet I had no way to combat the polished performance of Sophia's legal team. The most devastating blow came when they used my greatest sacrifice against me. The home I had built with my own hands, every nail hammered after 12-hour workdays, every weekend spent perfecting it for my family, was awarded to Sophia. The judge ruled that maintaining stability for Daniel in his childhood home was paramount, despite the fact that Sophia planned to move in with Richard as soon as the divorce was finalized. Daniel was 17 when the divorce was finalized, old enough to choose which parent he wanted to live with. I held on to hope that our bond would transcend the allure of Richard's wealth, that he would remember all we had shared. That hope was crushed the day he told me he had decided to live with his mother and Richard. "Their house has a pool, Dad, and my own bathroom. Plus Richard says he can help me get into a good college," Daniel explained, unable to meet my eyes. "You understand, right? It just makes more sense." I did not understand. I could not understand how material comforts could outweigh 17 years of love and sacrifice. But I swallowed my hurt and told him I supported whatever decision made him happy. I did not want to burden him with guilt or force him to choose sides more explicitly than he already had. After the divorce, I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment across town. At 42, I was starting over with nothing but my tools and a broken heart. The child support payments further strained my already tight finances, but I never missed a single one. I wanted Daniel to know that regardless of where he lived, his father would always provide for him. I made countless attempts to stay connected with Daniel. I called regularly, suggesting fishing trips or movie nights. Most calls went straight to voicemail. When Daniel did answer, our conversations were brief and stilted, filled with one-word answers and excuses about why he could not meet up. I will never forget attending his high school graduation. I arrived early to secure a good seat, clutching a card containing a heartfelt letter and the savings bonds I had purchased every birthday since his birth. After the ceremony, I searched the crowd for my son. When I finally spotted him, he was surrounded by Sophia Richard and their friends posing for photos. I approached hesitantly, my gift in hand. "Congratulations, son," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I am so proud of you." Daniel glanced at me, then at Richard, clearly uncomfortable. "Thanks, Dad," he mumbled, accepting my card without opening it. "We have reservations, so—" "Of course," I replied, stepping back. "Maybe we could grab lunch tomorrow, my treat." "I will call you," he promised, but we both knew he would not. That summer, Daniel grew increasingly distant. My calls were screened, my texts left unread. When he left for college, an expensive private university that Richard paid for, our communication dwindled to nothing. I drove 4 hours to visit him during his first semester, only to be told he was too busy with midterms to see me when I arrived. The final blow came during a phone call just before Christmas of his freshman year. I had sent a package with homemade cookies, a warm sweater I could barely afford, and an invitation to stay with me for part of his break. "Dad, I need you to stop calling so much," Daniel said, his voice cold and unfamiliar. "And the packages, the visits, it is too much. I need space." "Space," I echoed, my heart sinking. "Daniel, I just want to be part of your life." "Well, maybe I do not want you in my life right now," he snapped. "Richard is taking us to Aspen for Christmas, and Mom says your constant reaching out is stressing me out. Just stop, okay?" That was the last real conversation we had. For years afterward, I sent birthday cards, Christmas cards, graduation cards, all returned unopened. I continued making child support payments directly to his account, even after he turned 18, hoping he would see it as an expression of my unwavering love. The money was always withdrawn, but no acknowledgement ever came. The emotional toll was immense. I developed insomnia, often lying awake wondering where I had gone wrong. My doctor prescribed medication for depression, but nothing could fill the void left by my son's absence. The physical manifestations of grief followed weight loss, premature gray hair, constant fatigue. Coworkers commented that I had aged 10 years in the span of 2. Yet through it all, I kept Daniel's bedroom in my apartment, ready for him, holding on to the hope that someday he would walk through my door again. After the phone call with Daniel during his freshman year of college, I entered what I can only describe as 20 years of emotional winter. I continued living in my small apartment, working long hours to keep my mind occupied. During the day, I functioned mechanically, earning a reputation as the most reliable foreman on any job site. But evenings and weekends stretched before me like empty deserts. Despite Daniel's silence, I followed his life from afar. Social media became both my window and my torture device. I created accounts under a different name just to glimpse milestones I should have been part of. I saw his college graduation photos, Richard standing proudly beside him in matching suits. I saw him accept his first job at an investment firm, undoubtedly through Richard's connections. Each image was a knife twist, a reminder of my erasure from his narrative. When Daniel's relationship status changed to engaged to Alicia Montgomery, I spent hours staring at pictures of the young woman who would become my daughter-in-law without ever meeting me. She was beautiful, with auburn hair and a kind smile. I wondered if she even knew I existed, or if Daniel had written me out of his history completely. The wedding invitation never came. Instead, I discovered they had married at a vineyard in Napa Valley through photos posted by mutual acquaintances. I sat alone in my apartment that weekend, looking at the gift I had purchased anyway, a handcrafted wooden box containing letters I had written to Daniel every year since our estrangement, intended to show him that he had never left my heart. 3 years after the wedding, I learned through a casual comment on a photo that I had become a grandfather. Ethan Daniel Washington was born on April 3rd, weighing 8 pounds 2 ounces. I printed the single blurry photo I could find and framed it, speaking to the image as if the child could somehow hear his grandfather's voice across the distance. During these years, I threw myself into physical labor. I volunteered for the most demanding projects, working overtime whenever possible. The exhaustion helped me sleep at night. My body aged faster than it should have, my back permanently stooped, my hands increasingly arthritic from decades of construction work. But I persevered, finding small purpose in building homes for other families, even as my own remained shattered. The turning point in my lonely existence came in the form of Jackson Miller, an 80-year-old widower who moved into the apartment next door. Our first interaction was practical. His sink was leaking, and he knocked on my door, asking if I knew a good plumber. Instead of making a call, I grabbed my toolbox and fixed it myself. Jackson insisted on repaying me with dinner, which turned out to be the best homemade lasagna I had tasted since my mother passed. Over that meal, something unexpected happened. I talked. Really talked. About Sophia, about Daniel, about the 20 years of silence. Jackson listened without judgment, his weathered face nodding with understanding. Losing a child who is still living is its own special hell, Jackson said, refilling my glass with iced tea. My daughter chose drugs over family. 30 years now since I have heard her voice. You learn to live with the void, but it never stops being a void. That night marked the beginning of a friendship that would save me from complete isolation. Jackson became the father figure I had lost decades ago, and I became the son he missed. Every Sunday we shared dinner and stories. He had been a history professor before retirement, and his tales of ancient civilizations and world events temporarily transported me away from my pain. Jackson's wisdom about forgiveness became my lifeline. Forgiveness is not about releasing others from blame, he would say. It is about releasing yourself from the burning building of resentment. You can forgive Daniel and still acknowledge the pain he caused. The two are not mutually exclusive. Gradually, I began rebuilding something resembling a life. At 52, I left my job as a foreman to start a small handyman business. The flexible hours allowed me to take on projects I found personally rewarding, particularly helping elderly residents maintain their homes at affordable rates. The gratitude in their eyes gave me a sense of purpose I had been missing. During this period, I also discovered a passion for restoring vintage furniture. What began as a project to refurbish a discarded dresser for my apartment became a creative outlet that occupied my weekends. I learned to see beauty in damaged things, to recognize that with patience and care, what was broken could be made whole again, though never exactly the same. The metaphor was not lost on me. Occasionally, I would drive past Daniel's neighborhood, a gated community in the affluent part of town. I never stopped, never attempted contact. Sometimes I imagined I saw a little boy playing in one of the front yards, my grandson perhaps, but I always drove on before confirming. Some wounds were better left undisturbed. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned that Richard and Sophia's marriage had ended after 12 years. Apparently, Richard had repeated history, leaving Sophia for his young assistant. The irony was painful rather than satisfying. I took no pleasure in Sophia's unhappiness, but I did wonder if she ever recognized the parallel to our own story. Birthdays, holidays, and anniversaries remained the hardest days. Each Christmas, I bought a small gift for Daniel and Ethan, wrapping them carefully, before storing them in a growing collection, that would likely never be opened. Each year added another layer of emotional scar tissue, not healing exactly, but a protective covering that allowed me to amshifun despite the persistent ache of absence. By my 60th birthday, I had accepted that Daniel might never return to my life. Jackson, now in his late 80s and increasingly frail, hosted a small celebration for me. As I blew out the candles on the store-bought cake, I wished not for reconciliation, but for peace, the ability to fully embrace the life I had, rather than mourning the one I had lost. "You have done well, Washington," Jackson said that night, his voice reedy with age. "Few men could have endured what you have with such dignity. I am proud to call you my friend." 2 months later, Jackson fell ill with pneumonia. I spent every moment I could at his bedside in the hospital reading aloud from the history books he loved. When he slipped away peacefully in his sleep, I felt I had lost my family for a second time. Jackson's funeral was a small affair, attended mostly by former colleagues and a few neighbors from our apartment complex. I delivered the eulogy with a heavy heart, sharing stories of the man who had become my surrogate father in my time of greatest need. What I did not know then was that Jackson had one final gift to give me, one that would completely transform my life. 3 days after the funeral, I received a call from a man named Terrence Wells, who identified himself as Jackson's attorney. He requested a meeting at his downtown office, explaining that there were matters of inheritance to discuss. I assumed Jackson had perhaps left me a few books or personal mementos, tokens of our friendship, that I would treasure. When I arrived at the sleek glass building housing Wells and Associates, I felt immediately out of place in my worn jeans and work shirt. The receptionist eyed me dubiously until I stated my name and appointment. Minutes later, I was seated across from Terrence Wells in a corner office with a view of the city skyline. "Mr. Washington," Wells began adjusting his glasses. "I must say that when Jackson amended his will 5 years ago to name you as his primary beneficiary, I advised him to inform you. He insisted it should come as a surprise." I blinked, struggling to process his words. Primary beneficiary? There must be some mistake. Jackson and I were just neighbors, friends. Wells smiled gently. "In the 15 years you knew him, did Jackson ever mention his career before teaching?" "He said he worked in real estate briefly," I recalled, "before becoming a history professor." "That is quite an understatement," Wells chuckled. "Jackson Miller was one of the most successful real estate developers in the Midwest during the 1960s and 70s. He built shopping centers, apartment complexes, and office buildings across 5 states. When his wife died, he sold his company for a considerable sum and pursued his passion for history as a second career. The modest apartment, the simple lifestyle, those were choices, not necessities." My mind reeled as Wells slid a document across the desk. "Jackson has left you his entire estate valued at approximately $4.2 million. This includes liquid assets, investment portfolios, and 16 income-generating properties across the region." I stared at the papers before me, unable to comprehend how my life had changed in an instant. This cannot be right. Surely he had family, other friends. Jackson outlived his siblings, and as you know, his daughter has been estranged for decades. He considered you the son he never had. Wells removed his glasses. "He told me once that you were the most deserving man he had ever known, someone who had given much and received little in return. He wanted to correct that imbalance." The following weeks passed in a blur of signatures, meetings, and decisions. Local media picked up the story. "Local handyman inherits millions from elderly neighbor," complete with photos of me looking shell-shocked outside my apartment building. The article detailed my years as a construction worker and quoted former clients praising my honest work ethic. It mentioned nothing of Daniel or my estrangement, for which I was grateful. With Wells's guidance, I established a foundation in Jackson's name to help divorced fathers maintain relationships with their children through legal support and supervised visitation facilities. This became my passion project, a way to prevent others from experiencing the pain I had endured. My handyman business expanded into Washington Construction, a company specializing in affordable housing renovations. I hired skilled workers who needed second chances recovering addicts, former inmates, veterans struggling with reintegration. My experience had taught me the value of extending grace to those society often overlooked. Despite my newfound wealth, my personal lifestyle changed only modestly. I moved from my apartment into one of Jackson's properties, a comfortable 3-bedroom home with a workshop where I could continue my furniture restoration. I traded my aging truck for a newer model, but nothing flashy. The ostentation that had once attracted Sophia to Richard held no appeal for me. About a year after inheriting Jackson's estate, I met Patricia Hughes at a fundraiser for my foundation. A kindergarten teacher with silver-streaked dark hair and a ready laugh, she approached me after my speech to share her own story of helping children navigate parental separation. Our conversation lasted hours, spilling from the venue to a nearby diner where we talked until closing time. Patricia was divorced herself with grown children and grandchildren she adored. She understood grief and recovery, having lost her husband to cancer before their eventual divorce. Most importantly, she accepted my emotional baggage without trying to fix or minimize it. When I told her about Daniel, she listened with compassion rather than judgment. "Some wounds never fully heal," she said during our third dinner together. "They become part of who we are. The question is whether we let them define us entirely." Our relationship progressed slowly, neither of us feeling the urgency of youth. After 6 months, she began staying overnight at my house on weekends. After a year, we discussed the possibility of marriage without setting a definitive timeline. Her presence filled my home with warmth I had forgotten could exist. It was during this period of newfound stability that the past suddenly crashed back into my life. While shopping at an upscale grocery store with Patricia, I literally bumped carts with Sophia. 23 years had passed since our divorce, and time had not been particularly kind to her. The blonde hair was now platinum to hide the gray her face lined, despite obvious efforts to prevent it. She wore expensive clothes that seemed at odds with her shopping choices' store-brand basics, rather than the gourmet items that filled the cart in her Richard days. "Washington," she gasped, recognition dawning. "I cannot believe it is you." "Hello, Sophia," I replied, surprised by my own calmness. An awkward introduction to Patricia followed, during which Sophia's eyes darted assessingly between us. As Patricia tactfully excused herself to select produce, Sophia moved closer. "You look good," she said, her tone suggesting surprise. "I heard about your windfall. The whole town was talking about it." I merely nodded, unwilling to engage in financial discussions. "Richard left me, you know," she continued, a bitter edge creeping into her voice. "For his 28-year-old assistant. History repeating itself, I suppose. The difference is he had a prenup. I got practically nothing after 16 years together." "I am sorry to hear that," I said, and meant it. Despite everything, I took no pleasure in her hardship. She glanced around before leaning in conspiratorially. "I have been thinking about the past a lot lately. We had good times, did not we? Before everything got complicated, maybe we could get coffee sometime, catch up properly." The invitation hung in the air between us. 20 years ago, I would have jumped at this opportunity, seeing it as a path back to Daniel. Now I recognized it for what it was, a lifeline cast in my direction, rather than one extended to me. "I am in a good place now, Sophia," I replied gently. "I wish you well truly. But I think some chapters are better left closed." The flash of indignation in her eyes confirmed I had made the right decision. Patricia returned, sensing tension, and smoothly guided our cart toward the checkout. As we walked away, Sophia called after me. "Have you heard from Daniel lately? He has a son now, your grandson." I turned back briefly. "I know, Ethan. He looks like Daniel did at that age." The fact that I knew this information clearly surprised her. Before she could respond, Patricia and I continued to the register. 2 weeks after this encounter, the business magazine for our region published a feature article about Washington construction, highlighting our community initiatives and successful projects. The piece included a photograph of me at a building site and mentioned the substantial growth of the company over the past year. My net worth was estimated at upwards of $6 million, when including the foundation and property holdings, an invasion of privacy that made me distinctly uncomfortable. 3 days after the article was published, my phone rang with a number I did not recognize. When I answered, the voice on the other end stopped my heart. "Dad, it is Daniel. I think it is time we talked." I sat in my living room, phone clutched in my hand long after the call had ended. Daniel's voice, deeper and more mature than the last time we had spoken, echoed in my ears. 20 years of silence broken by a 5-minute conversation that left me reeling with conflicting emotions. "Patricia," I called, my voice unsteady. "Daniel just called. After all this time." She appeared in the doorway, immediately concern etched on her face. "What did he say?" I recounted the conversation as precisely as I could. Daniel had been casual, almost breezy, as if we had spoken last week rather than 2 decades ago. He asked about my situation with an awkwardness that suggested he was dancing around the topic of money. Then came the invitation: Christmas dinner at his home, a chance to catch up and meet the family. It is amazing how we lose touch over the years. He had said no acknowledgement of the deliberate nature of our estrangement. "When I saw that article about your company, I realized it has been way too long. We should reconnect, especially with the holidays coming up." He mentioned my good fortune 3 times in 5 minutes. I told Patricia the suspicion I did not want to feel creeping in nonetheless. He never once said he missed me or was sorry for cutting me out of his life. Patricia sat beside me, her hand covering mine. "What does your heart tell you about his intentions?" "I want to believe he genuinely wants to reconnect," I admitted. "But the timing is too convenient. 20 years of nothing, then a call right after my finances become public knowledge. It feels calculated." "Do you want my honest opinion?" Patricia asked gently. I nodded. "I think you should accept the invitation, but protect your heart. Set boundaries. Observe rather than assume. If his motives are pure, time will reveal that. If not, at least you will know for certain." Her advice resonated with my own instincts. That night, I barely slept, my mind churning with questions and memories. The next morning, I made 2 important decisions. First, I would accept Daniel's invitation. Second, I would investigate his current situation before walking into what could be an emotionally devastating scenario. Through business connections in the financial sector, I discreetly inquired about Daniel's investment firm. The information that came back confirmed my suspicions. Washington and Associates had suffered significant losses during the recent market downturn. Several clients had pulled their investments, and rumors of a potential bankruptcy filing were circulating in financial circles. A deeper search through public records revealed a notice of foreclosure proceedings on Daniel's home, the same home where I was invited to celebrate Christmas. The bank had already issued a 90-day warning, which meant Daniel and his family were at imminent risk of losing their residence. The picture becoming clear did not bring me any satisfaction. If anything, it added another layer of pain to our complicated relationship. Had Daniel reached out solely because of my financial resources? Was I nothing more than a potential bailout to him? The thought was almost too painful to bear. Patricia found me in my workshop that evening, absently sanding the same spot on a cherry wood table I was restoring. "You found something, did not you?" she asked, noting my distant expression. I shared what I had discovered, my voice hollow. "I am sorry, Washington," she said softly. "What will you do now?" "I am still going to go," I replied, setting down the sandpaper. "But I am going with a plan of my own." Over the next 3 weeks, I prepared for the Christmas dinner with the meticulous care of a general planning a campaign. I selected thoughtful gifts for each family member, a vintage first edition of The Great Gatsby, for Daniel, remembering his love for the book in high school, a handcrafted silk scarf for Alicia, whom I had never met, and for Ethan, my grandson, I spent countless hours in my workshop, creating a wooden toy chest, with his name carved into the lid, filled with toys appropriate for an 8-year-old boy. I also gathered evidence of my attempts to maintain contact over the years, photocopies of returned cards, phone records, showing my regular calls, receipts for gifts never acknowledged. I placed these in a simple manila envelope, not sure if I would need them, but wanting to be prepared. The final element of my plan required a visit to my attorney. There, I made specific arrangements that would protect both my heart and my assets, while still leaving room for genuine reconciliation. I did not want revenge. I wanted truth and perhaps a chance to rebuild what had been lost if Daniel's heart was truly open to it. On Christmas Eve, I stood before my closet, deliberating over my appearance. I wanted to look successful, but not ostentatious, comfortable, but not careless. I finally settled on a navy blue suit with a light blue shirt, no tie polished, but approachable. Patricia helped straighten my collar, her eyes reflecting both support and concern. "Remember," she said, "no matter what happens today, you have built a good life. You have people who love you exactly as you are. His acceptance or rejection cannot take that away from you." I kissed her forehead gently. "I know, and thank you for being the kind of partner who understands why I need to do this alone." As I loaded the carefully wrapped gifts into my car, I took a deep breath of the cold December air. For better or worse, 20 years of silence would end today. The GPS guided me through unfamiliar neighborhoods until I reached the gates of Oakwood Estates, an exclusive community where homes started at 7 figures. I provided my name to the security guard who checked a list before waving me through with a nod. The pristine streets were lined with elaborate Christmas displays, professional installations rather than personal expressions of holiday spirit. Daniel's house was impressive from the outside, a 2-story colonial with white columns and perfectly symmetrical windows. A luxury SUV and a sports car occupied the circular driveway. The property screamed success, though knowing what I did about their financial situation, I recognized it as a facade rapidly crumbling from within. I sat in my car for several minutes, gathering my courage. The gifts felt inadequate now, confronted with the grandeur of their home. But I reminded myself that the wooden toy chest represented hours of love and craftsmanship, something money could not buy. My finger had barely touched the doorbell when the door swung open. And there stood Daniel, my son, now a man of 37. His hair was thinning slightly, and fine lines creased the corners of his eyes, but he was unmistakably the boy I had raised. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the weight of 2 decades filling the space between us. "Dad," he finally said, his voice overly bright. "You made it. Come in, come in." I stepped into a marble-floored foyer, decorated with expensive art and a massive Christmas tree that looked like it belonged in a department store window. The house was impressively decorated, but lacked the warmth of a lived-in home. I noticed subtle signs of neglect beneath the luxury, a water stain poorly disguised on one ceiling, chipping paint on a baseboard, a cracked tile hastily covered by an area rug. "Let me take your coat." Daniel offered, his movements stiff and formal. "Everyone is in the living room." I followed him through the house carrying my gifts, noting how he filled the silence with commentary about the property, the custom cabinetry in the kitchen, the imported tile in the bathrooms, the hand-painted mural in the dining room. He spoke like a real estate agent showing a property rather than a son welcoming his father. In the living room, a slender woman with auburn hair rose from an elegant sofa. "You must be Washington," she said, extending her manicured hand. "I am Alicia. It is so nice to finally meet you." Her emphasis on "finally" hung awkwardly in the air, an unintentional acknowledgement of the 20-year gap in our family's connection. Beside her stood a boy with dark hair and familiar blue eyes, my father's eyes. "And this is Ethan," Daniel said, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Ethan, this is your grandfather." The child looked up at me with curiosity rather than recognition. "Hello," he said politely. "Dad says you build things." My heart constricted at the simple statement. What else had Daniel told him about me? Did he know I existed before this invitation? I knelt down to Ethan's level, offering him a genuine smile. "That is right. I have been building things all my life. Maybe someday I could teach you how to build something too." Ethan's eyes lit up with interest, but Daniel quickly interjected. "Let us get you a drink, Dad. Scotch still your preference?" "I have an 18-year-old Macallan I have been saving for a special occasion." The irony of an 18-year-old Scotch when we had been estranged for 20 years was not lost on me. "Just water for now, thank you," I replied, not wanting alcohol to cloud my judgment. We settled into an uncomfortable tableau in the living room, Daniel and Alicia on the sofa, me in an armchair, Ethan on the floor playing with an electronic device. Conversation moved in fits and starts, focused primarily on safe topics, the weather, traffic, local sports teams. Daniel periodically dropped references to my lucky break, with Jackson's inheritance, each mention more transparent than the last. "That article mentioned you have quite the real estate portfolio now," he said, attempting casualness. "Ironic is not it. You built houses your whole life and now you own them instead." "Jackson was very generous," I replied neutrally. "His kindness changed my life." "I have always been interested in real estate investment," Alicia chimed in, her voice honeyed. "Such a stable way to build wealth." I nodded non-committally, observing rather than reacting. Every comment, every glance between Daniel and Alicia confirmed what I had suspected. This reunion had nothing to do with reconciliation and everything to do with their financial crisis. Daniel offered a tour of their home, pointing out expensive renovations and naming the designers responsible for various rooms. As we passed Ethan's bedroom, I noticed it was the only space that felt genuinely lived in: walls covered with dinosaur posters, shelves filled with books and toys. "He is a bright kid," Daniel said, following my gaze. "Top of his class. Gets his brains from both sides of the family." The comment, seemingly inclusive, highlighted how little Daniel knew about my life over the past 20 years. He had no idea if I had pursued education, later in life developed new skills, or accomplished anything of note. I was simply a genetic contributor in his narrative. Dinner was served in their formal dining room, catered rather than home-cooked, with wine served in crystal glasses. The conversation remained superficial until dessert, when Daniel finally broached the real purpose of the invitation. "So, Dad," he began, setting down his fork with deliberate casualness, "I have been meaning to discuss something with you. A business opportunity, actually." Alicia nodded encouragingly, while Ethan, bored with adult conversation, asked to be excused to play with his tablet. Our investment firm has been exploring expansion opportunities, Daniel continued once Ethan had left the room. There is a prime commercial property we are interested in developing, but with the current economic climate, traditional financing has become challenging. What Daniel is trying to say, Alicia interjected with a pointed look at her husband, is that we would like to propose a family investment partnership. With your construction expertise and our market knowledge, we could create something truly significant together. I took a slow sip of water, considering my response. How much would this family investment partnership require? Daniel and Alicia exchanged glances before he answered. We were thinking $2 million as an initial capital infusion. Completely secured against the property, of course. $2 million, almost half of what Jackson had left me, and significantly more than what they needed to save their home from foreclosure. The excess would likely fund their lifestyle while they attempted to salvage Daniel's failing business. That is a substantial amount, I observed quietly. Before we discuss business, though, I have a question for you, Daniel. Of course, he replied, already reaching for documents in a folder beside his plate. Why did you never return my calls? The question landed like a stone in still water. Daniel froze, his expression shifting from confident to confused. What? For 20 years I called you, sent cards, gifts for birthdays and Christmas. Why did you never respond? An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Alicia looked between us, clearly not having anticipated this turn in the conversation. That was a complicated time, Daniel finally said, his voice defensive. After the divorce with Mom so upset, it just seemed easier to make a clean break. A clean break? I repeated the word slowly. Is that what you call erasing your father from your life? I was at your high school graduation, Daniel. I stood 10 feet from you, and you pretended not to see me. Dad, that was a long time ago, he deflected. People grow apart. It happens. But we are here now, trying to rebuild our relationship. Is not that what matters? Is that what we are doing? Rebuilding. Because from where I am sitting, it looks like you ignored my existence until you learned I had money, and now you are asking for $2 million before the dessert plates are cleared. Alicia's face flushed with embarrassment, or anger, perhaps both. Daniel's expression hardened. That is unfair, he protested. Yes, the timing is convenient, I admit that. But this is a legitimate business opportunity that benefits us both, and it gives us a chance to reconnect. I reached into my jacket pocket and removed the manila envelope I had prepared. Carefully, I extracted a stack of photographs, each showing a Christmas card I had sent over the years, marked "Return to Sender" in Daniel's handwriting. 20 cards, I said quietly. 20 birthdays, 20 Christmases. I never stopped trying to reach you, Daniel. Not once in 20 years. His eyes darted away from the evidence before him. Mom said you had moved on, started a new life. She said it would be better for everyone if we made a clean break. And you believed that without ever asking me, without ever giving me a chance to be your father. Alicia, sensing the conversation spiraling away from their financial objectives, attempted to redirect. Perhaps we should table the investment discussion for another time. This is supposed to be a family gathering after all. Yes, it is, I agreed, turning my attention to her. And family should be honest with each other. Did Daniel tell you that his childhood home was foreclosed on because I could not afford to keep it after paying child support? Did he mention that I lived in a one-bedroom apartment for 15 years, working 60-hour weeks to stay afloat? Or that I sent money for his college expenses despite having no legal obligation to do so? Daniel's face reddened. That is ancient history. Why bring it up now to make me feel guilty? No, I said, my voice steady. To establish truth. Because without truth, there can be no real relationship, family, or business. I stood up and walked to the living room, returning with the gifts I had brought. I placed the package for Ethan on the table first. I made this for my grandson. A toy chest with his name carved on it. I spent 40 hours on it, getting every detail right for a child I have never met. Next came Alicia's gift. A hand-dyed silk scarf from an artisan in Vermont. I chose blue because Daniel once mentioned it was your favorite color. Finally, I placed Daniel's gift before him. A first edition of The Great Gatsby. You loved this book in high school. You did a presentation on it for your English class. I was so proud of you that day. Daniel stared at the wrapped packages, speechless for once. I know about the foreclosure notice, Daniel. I know your business is failing. I know you need money not for an investment opportunity, but to save your home and your reputation. His head snapped up, shock and anger flashing across his face. You investigated me. What gave you the right? The same right you assumed when you invited your estranged father to Christmas dinner with the intention of asking for $2 million, I replied calmly. Self-protection. Alicia placed her hand on Daniel's arm, sensing his rising anger. Daniel, maybe we should listen to what your father has to say. I looked at them both, seeing the fear beneath their facade of confidence. They were drowning, reaching for any lifeline available, even one they had deliberately cut 20 years ago. I did come with a plan today, I admitted, but it is probably not what you are expecting. For several long moments, the only sound in the dining room was the gentle ticking of an ornate grandfather clock in the corner. Daniel's face had drained of color, his earlier confidence replaced by a volatile mix of shame and defensive anger. Alicia sat perfectly still, her social grace finally abandoned, as reality settled over the table. What kind of plan? Daniel finally asked, his voice strained. First, I want to speak with you alone, I replied, glancing at Alicia apologetically. Some conversations need to happen between father and son. Though clearly reluctant, Alicia nodded and excused herself, mentioning she would check on Ethan. Once she had left, I turned back to Daniel. Why do not we step outside? I suggested, nodding toward the French doors leading to the back patio. Some fresh air might help. The December evening was cold, but not unbearable. The patio illuminated by string lights that cast a soft glow across the expansive backyard. A play set stood in one corner, and nearby a half-completed treehouse project showed signs of abandonment, perhaps when their financial troubles began. Daniel pulled his sweater tighter around himself, looking suddenly vulnerable despite being in his own territory. So what is this plan of yours? Are you here to gloat? To watch us lose everything before you leave again? Leave again. I repeated the words, hitting me like a physical blow. Daniel, I never left. You pushed me away. There is a difference. He looked away, jaw tight. What does it matter now, ancient history, right? You said you had a plan. Let us hear it. I took a deep breath, centering myself before speaking. I had my attorney draw up papers, not for a loan, not for an investment, for a legitimate business partnership. This caught his attention. Washington Construction needs a financial division, someone who understands investment strategies, market analysis, client portfolio management, someone who could be trained to eventually take over the company. Daniel's eyes widened slightly as understanding dawned. You are offering me a job after everything you think I would come work for you. Not for me. With me, I clarified. As partners, equal shareholders in the construction division with the opportunity to earn equity in the property management company over time. He stared at me, suspicion evident. Why would you do that? Why not just loan us the money we need? Because a loan would solve your immediate problem, but create a new dynamic between us lender and borrower. I do not want financial transactions to define our relationship moving forward. Daniel scoffed. So instead, you want me working under you, having to prove myself all over again? No, I said firmly. I want us to build something together. Something legitimate that helps your family and creates a legacy for Ethan. Something that requires both of us to show up day after day and do the hard work of rebuilding not just a business, but a relationship. The sincerity in my voice seemed to penetrate his defenses slightly. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar, it made my heart ache. It was the same motion he had made as a teenager when confronted with a difficult decision. What about our home? He asked the question, an implicit admission of their financial crisis. The company will purchase it at market value, resolving the foreclosure. You can continue living here paying reasonable rent that goes toward eventual repurchase. No charity, just business. Daniel's expression shifted between disbelief and cautious hope. And what do you get out of this arrangement? Here I allowed my carefully maintained composure to soften. I get my son back, and I get to know my grandson. That is what I have wanted for 20 years, Daniel. Nothing else has ever mattered as much. Something broke in Daniel's expression, the armor of adulthood cracking to reveal the boy I had once known. He turned away abruptly, facing the darkness beyond the patio lights. You do not know what you are asking, he said, his voice unsteady. You do not know what I have done, the things I have said about you. I can imagine, I replied quietly. Richard and your mother likely had strong opinions about me that influenced you. You were young, vulnerable to their perspective. I told Ethan you abandoned us. He admitted the words, tumbling out in a rush of shame. I told him you chose your work over your family. That you did not want us anymore. Each word was a knife twist, but I had prepared myself for this possibility. Why? I asked simply. Daniel's shoulders slumped. Because the truth made me feel guilty. Because every time Mom complained about you, I remembered all the baseball games you never missed, despite working 12-hour days. Because Richard bought me things, but never had time for me, and it made me think about all the time you always made. Because, his voice cracked, because I chose wrong, and admitting that was too painful. The raw honesty stunned me. For 20 years I had imagined this conversation, but never expected such vulnerability from the son who had shut me out so completely. We all make choices we regret, Daniel. The question is what we do with those regrets. Do we bury them, or do we use them to build something better? He turned back to face me, and I saw tears tracking silently down his face, my grown son crying, just as he had when he scraped his knee at 7 years old. I do not deserve your help, he said, wiping roughly at his eyes. I do not deserve anything from you. This is not about deserving, I replied. It is about choosing what kind of men we want to be moving forward. I choose to be a father who offers his son a path to reconciliation. What do you choose to be? The question hung in the cold air between us. Inside the house, I could see Alicia watching anxiously through the window, Ethan now at her side. 3 generations of Washington men separated by glass, and years of absence yet connected by blood and possibility. I have failed at everything, Daniel confessed, his voice barely audible. My business, my marriage is struggling. Even this house is built on debt and lies. How can I start over at 37? I started over at 42, I reminded him. After losing everything, my home, my wife, my son. If I could rebuild from that, you can certainly rebuild with support. He looked at me, then really looked at me, perhaps for the first time since I had arrived. How are you not bitter? Oh, can you offer help after what I did? I was bitter, I acknowledged. For years I was angry and hurt beyond words. But bitterness is a prison, Daniel. Eventually I realized I could stay locked in that cell of resentment, or I could find a way to live meaningfully despite the pain. Something shifted in Daniel's expression, recognition perhaps of the man I had become, rather than the father he had chosen to forget. I should talk to Alicia, he said finally. This affects her too. Of course, I agreed. And afterward I would like some time with my grandson, if that is possible. Daniel nodded, a gesture simultaneously small and monumental. As we moved toward the house, he paused with his hand on the door. Dad. He said the word sounding foreign on his lips after so many years. I am sorry. I know it is not enough, but I am truly sorry. It is a start, I replied, placing my hand briefly on his shoulder. A good start. Inside, Alicia listened intently as Daniel outlined my proposal. Her initial skepticism gave way to cautious relief as she understood this was not a humiliating bailout, but a legitimate business arrangement that preserved their dignity while solving their immediate crisis. What about Ethan? She asked, glancing toward the living room where he played. How do we explain all this to him? With truth, I suggested. Age-appropriate truth. Children understand more than we give them credit for, and they sense lies even when they cannot articulate them. Daniel nodded slowly. I will talk to him. Correct the narrative I created. While they spoke privately in the kitchen, I wandered into the living room, where Ethan was building something with electronic blocks that lit up and made sounds when connected. I watched him for a moment before he noticed me. Do you like building things too? I asked, gesturing toward his creation. He nodded. I am making a spaceship. Dad bought me this set, but he never has time to build with me. The simple statement revealed volumes about their family dynamic. I knelt beside him, careful not to invade his space. May I see? Ethan considered me for a moment, before scooting over to make room. You can help if you want. The red pieces are really hard to snap together. I settled beside him, accepting a handful of blocks. You know, when your dad was about your age, we used to build things together too. But we used wood instead of these fancy electronic blocks. His eyes widened with interest. Real wood with like tools and stuff. Exactly. Hammers, saws, measuring tape, the works. We built a birdhouse once that attracted a family of cardinals. They lived there for 3 summers. That is cool, he said, genuine admiration in his voice. Could you teach me to build stuff like that? I would like that very much, I replied, emotion catching in my throat. If it is okay with your parents, of course. We continued building in companionable silence, the spaceship taking shape between us. There was something profoundly healing in the simple act of creating, alongside my grandson, this child who carried my blood, but had never known my name. Later, as Daniel and Alicia rejoined us, I saw a new openness in their expressions. Not forgiveness yet, not complete acceptance, but willingness, the essential first step in any journey of reconciliation. Ethan, Daniel said, sitting beside his son. There is something important I need to tell you about your grandfather. As Daniel began the difficult task of reshaping his son's understanding of our family history, I caught a glimpse of the man he was capable of becoming, and one who acknowledged mistakes and took responsibility for correcting them. In that moment, regardless of what came next, I felt a father's pride once again. The Christmas gifts were finally opened. Ethan exclaimed over the handcrafted toy chest, running his small fingers over his name carved into the wood. Alicia wrapped the silk scarf around her shoulders with genuine appreciation. and Daniel held the first edition Gatsby with trembling hands, opening the cover to discover the inscription I had written. Some bonds cannot be broken, only tested. With love always. Dad. When it was time for me to leave, plans had been made for New Year's dinner at my home, a chance for them to meet Patricia and see the life I had built during our years apart. The legal details would wait until after the holidays, but the framework of our future relationship had been established. As I walked to my car, Daniel followed me outside. "Dad," he called, his breath visible in the cold night air. "Thank you, not just for the financial help, but for never giving up on me even when I gave up on you." I embraced my son then for the first time in 20 years. His arms wrapped around me hesitantly at first, then with growing certainty. We stood that way for a long moment, neither willing to be the first to let go. The drive home from Daniel's house felt surreal, as if I was floating between my past and future rather than traveling a physical road. Patricia was waiting for me, sitting in our living room, with a book in her lap and concern in her eyes. One look at my face told her everything she needed to know. "Oh, Washington," she said, rising to embrace me. "It went well." I sank into her arms, finally allowing the emotions of the day to wash over me. "Better than I could have imagined, and harder than I expected," I admitted, my voice thick with emotion. We sat together on this couch as I recounted the evening, the awkward beginning, the financial request, the breakthrough on the patio, and finally the tender moments with Ethan. Patricia listened without interruption, her hand steady in mine. "You handled it beautifully," she said, when I had finished. "With dignity and compassion, but also with healthy boundaries. I am so proud of you." "I have you to thank for much of that," I replied, squeezing her hand. "Your love gave me the security to approach this without fear controlling my actions." That night I slept more peacefully than I had in years, as if a weight I had carried for so long had finally been set down. The journey ahead would not be simple. Rebuilding trust never is, but for the first time in 20 years, the path forward was illuminated rather than shrouded in darkness. True to our agreement, Daniel, Alicia, and Ethan joined Patricia and me for New Year's dinner. The initial awkwardness gradually gave way to more natural interaction as the evening progressed. Ethan, unburdened by the complex history between the adults, moved freely between worlds, eager to explore my workshop and examine the furniture restoration projects in various stages of completion. "You really make all these things?" he asked, wide-eyed, at a rocking chair I was refinishing. "I do," I confirmed. "It helps me think and it keeps my hands busy." "Dad says you are going to teach me woodworking," he said, running his fingers along the chair's smooth arm. "If that is something you would like to learn, it would be my pleasure." His enthusiastic nod sealed our first grandfather-grandson project, a simple wooden toolbox that would become his own. Over the following months, our new reality took shape gradually. The legal aspects of our business partnership were finalized, with Daniel beginning to work at Washington Construction 3 days a week while managing the transition of his investment clients. The foreclosure on their home was resolved through the company's purchase, with a structured agreement for them to eventually repurchase it. The healing between father and son progressed in fits and starts. Some days felt natural and easy, while others brought uncomfortable confrontations with the past. During one particularly difficult conversation, Daniel confessed the full extent of Richard's influence on his perception of me. "He told me real men make money, not things," Daniel admitted. "He said your hands were calloused because you were not smart enough to make a living with your monde. I was young enough to believe him to be embarrassed by your work clothes and your pickup truck." "And now?" I asked gently. Daniel looked down at his own hands, soft from years behind a desk. Now I understand that strength takes many forms, that building something tangible, something that lasts, requires a kind of intelligence Richard never possessed. These moments of truth, though painful, were essential to rebuilding our foundation. We were not erasing the past, but integrating it into a new understanding of each other. Ethan became the unexpected bridge between us, his Saturday morning woodworking sessions in my workshop, creating a neutral space where 3 generations could connect without the weight of history. The first project, his toolbox expanded to bookshelves for his room, a birdhouse for the backyard, and eventually completing the abandoned treehouse at their home. "You know," Daniel commented one afternoon as we worked side by side on the treehouse platform, "I started this project when things began falling apart financially. I told myself I would finish it when things turned around. I never imagined it would be you helping me complete it." "Life rarely follows the blueprints we draw for it," I replied, checking the level on a beam. "The trick is being willing to revise the plans rather than abandoning the project entirely." He nodded, understanding the metaphor for what it was, a gentle acknowledgement of our own reconstruction. Alicia, initially the most skeptical of our reconciliation, gradually became an ally in the healing process. One evening after Ethan had gone to bed, she confessed that Daniel had nearly called me multiple times over the years. "After Ethan was born especially," she revealed, "he would look at your number on his phone for the longest time before putting it away." Pride is a powerful force, Washington. It kept him from reaching out even when he wanted to. "Pride is a luxury we can only afford for so long," I replied. "Eventually, life humbles us all." The 1-year anniversary of our Christmas reunion arrived with a different kind of celebration. No tension, no hidden agendas, just family gathered around my dining room table, expanded now to accommodate our growing connections. Patricia and Alicia had developed a genuine friendship, often meeting for coffee, independent of family gatherings. Ethan had claimed the guest bedroom in our house as his room, decorating it with his artwork and treasures from our woodworking sessions. Daniel, now fully integrated into Washington construction, had discovered unexpected fulfillment in our work together. His financial expertise complemented my practical knowledge, allowing the company to expand in ways I never could have managed alone. More importantly, he had begun to rebuild his sense of self-worth beyond material success, finding satisfaction in creating housing for families in need. As for me, the journey from abandoned father to restored patriarch had transformed me in ways I never anticipated. The bitterness that once threatened to consume me had been replaced by a profound gratitude for second chances. I had learned that forgiveness is not a single act, but a continuous choice, one that liberates the forgiver more than the forgiven. On a crisp autumn afternoon, nearly 2 years after our reconciliation began, Daniel and I stood on the porch of a newly completed affordable housing project developed by Washington Construction. As we watched families receiving keys to their new homes, Daniel turned to me with an expression of quiet revelation. "You know, Dad, I spent 20 years chasing what I thought was success, money, status, appearances. But watching these families today, I finally understand what you tried to teach me all along. Real success is building something that matters, something that lasts beyond yourself." "It took me 60 years to fully learn that lesson," I admitted. "We are right on schedule." He laughed, the sound remarkably like the boy I remembered. "Better late than never, right?" "Exactly," I agreed, placing my hand on his shoulder. Better late than never. The greatest gift of our reconciliation has been the freedom it granted both of us, freedom from the prison of resentment, from the burden of unacknowledged guilt, from the loneliness of broken connection. Money may have opened the door to our reunion, but truth and forgiveness were what allowed us to walk through it together. I sometimes wonder what Jackson would think of how I used his inheritance. Not just the financial aspects, but the emotional investment in rebuilding what was broken. I like to think he would approve of how his generosity created not just wealth, but healing across generations. As for Ethan, he will grow up knowing that reconciliation is possible even after deep hurt, that forgiveness does not erase accountability, but creates space for growth, and that family bonds can be renewed when approached with honesty and open hearts. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have opened your door and your heart after 20 years of silence? Would you have offered help or demanded apologies? First, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that reconciliation is possible even after years of estrangement. Thank you for joining me on this journey of healing. And remember, it is never too late to rebuild what matters most.